Hi, I'm Nicole Fabiano from Your Instructional Designer, and I'm here today with Melanie Sexton. Melanie, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am a senior e-learning developer for a cybersecurity software company, but I don't have a very traditional instructional design background. I'm actually trained as an illustrator. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, and I've done comics, I've done illustration work. I got into teaching a little bit at the higher ed level for art and design. I've taught in libraries. I ran a makerspace for a little bit, teaching people of all ages. But then I have created online courses for big clients such as Blackboard, my current employer, and I've also done educational assets for the U.S. military on a healthcare contract, which was really cool. But now my passion and my interests are leading me more towards UX design.
I've seen some of your illustrations, and I'm really jealous of your artistic talent, by the way. But UX, I know, folks who are really immersed in instructional design, that might be like a new term to them. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that really means?
Sure. So UX, or user experience design, I know that a lot of people in this field, particularly in instructional design and e-learning, it very simply is the user experience from end to end, start to finish. This can be a product, this can be a service. We access these kinds of things all day long. But there's a lot of thought, a lot of design, a lot of systems thinking that goes into UX. And so for somebody who happens to create e-learning, that might be the user experience from the start of a learner taking a course, going through that content, and then finishing through a certificate, for example, at the end of the course. There's also an element of UI. I know that that's an acronym tossed around a lot. UI, or the user interface, is a part of UX design. If you think about UX design, you may want to think of it as the steps of a process of that experience. But the UI, that user interface, are the graphics. In e-learning, that might be the player that you're working with in Articulate or Captivate. And for customized content on e-learning, that might be some of the graphics or video snippets that you use within an e-learning course. So that would be the UI, the buttons that are on digital learning. And so UI is a part of the user experience. And I know for a lot of e-learning professionals, this is a really hot topic. And I think it's a great area to explore. There's a lot of translation that we do in e-learning. So if you think back, for example, to the very traditional ADDIE model of analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate, there's a lot of that process that can be translated into user experience. And I think it's really cool that you can have a keen eye on who the users are, empathizing with them, understanding what their needs are, and designing and developing something with user testing that helps you as an instructional designer better understand if your training is really working and if it's valuable to your learners.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What sort of pulled you in that direction? Because you started off more in the graphic stuff, so I would think you'd lean towards UI, but not quite, right?
Right. So, as I stated before, I come from a background of teaching, and then I decided to go behind the scenes and develop training. I was given a unique opportunity at a large LMS company to move over and get a little bit of on-the-ground experience as a UX designer, a very junior role. I worked side by side with development teams across the world, And I learned a lot on the ground, and I got a lot of understanding of what is this process of the user experience and how does UI play a factor into digital products. I was also part of a research team, which very ironically, the topic was better understanding of instructional designers in higher education. And where that is a field that I have been in, and I have a lot of empathy for instructional designers. It was very interesting for me to go through the process as a researcher, and to gather that data and put it into meaningful ways that can help a UX design team better better design experience through their digital products. And so once I got that experience on the ground, I realized that going into it without much training, I was definitely over my head. And so I decided to go back to school for a little bit. I enrolled at Austin Community College here in Austin, Texas, and I decided to take a couple of courses. One of them was UI Design 1, where I got to learn what those different design patterns are that you see in everyday web apps that you access every day. So web apps, mobile apps, and not only understand what they are, how to recognize them, but how to talk about them. Because I just have this real growing interest in not only making learning a lot more fun and accessible and just a better experience overall, but also kind of dabbling a little bit in the web and mobile space for application design. And then the second course, I unfortunately dropped it due to the pandemic and just the uncertainty of everything right now. But the second class that I took was interaction design. And what's cool about that was almost every single class that I would go to, a lot of what we learned can be directly translated into e-learning. There's a lot of interaction design that's not through a digital space. So for example, if you think about service design, if you think about you as a customer interacting with a delivery person, for example, from Amazon or UPS, that's all part of a supply chain, and that's all included from a physical aspect of interaction design. And so there were a lot of different key takeaways that I was able to gain from that course from a physical and a digital perspective. And I wish I could have finished it maybe in the future. But I think going back to school and understanding this a little bit better has enabled me to pursue current projects that are more in the UX and app design space.
Well, it sounds like you learned a lot from that course, even if you didn't get all the way through. And I do hope there's an opportunity for you in the future. I know this has been just a really crazy time for a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're you've really gotten something out of it. Is there maybe one thing you would pull for people who haven't taken a UX design class but are in the learning industry that you think they should know about?
I would definitely say that one of the key areas that I've noticed, and I know it's a real pain point for instructional design and e-learning, is better understanding who your learner is. When you look at a process framework like ADDIE, you have analysis is the first part, right? And unfortunately, I've been in situations like this on an education team where you don't really have access to who your learners are. And I think one piece of advice is take the playbook from UX design. And what I mean by that is look for, if you don't have access directly to who your learners are, maybe find advocates or representatives in your company that do have access to those customers or learners who you foresee consuming your content, and really take a look at, from the UX point of view, what generative research, so understanding their day-to-day, understanding what their pain points are and their knowledge gaps and learning, for example, might be, and then creating a journey map. I know that that term is thrown around a lot, particularly in design thinking. But the better that you can understand who your learner is and what their problem space is, the better e-learning and training you can design and develop for them, because you have an actual problem or knowledge gap to solve. So if you're unfamiliar with the UX design space, that would be definitely a first step, is to better understand and use that real analysis or better user research to gain that knowledge early in the process.
Yeah, that's super insightful. I can't imagine, you know, what it would be like if everybody could get that access. It would definitely be a game changer. But you've given us some things to really think about. Is there anything that, you know, whether it's specific or generic, that you would tell people who are new to the field of learning to think about?
I think, you know, whether you're coming in as an instructional designer or an e-learning developer, I think being open to change and expanding your skill set. I know that that might seem really small and that's not very UX design specific, but when I entered the field of education at large, I was teaching. I had no idea that my career would lead me to developing a passion for designing applications that are helping people, for example. But within that journey, I was exposed to a lot of programs and a lot of tools that have helped me become more self-sufficient along the way. And I know in e-learning, sometimes there's a lot of tools like Articulate, Storyline, or iMovie, or, you know, like a lot of tools that you think are really hard to learn or understand. Go to classes or look on YouTube. I've had to learn After Effects, Premiere, 3D modeling. When I was at the library running the makerspace, I had to learn 3D printing and how to declog the 3D printer. All of these different tools and softwares and different skill sets that you gain along the way are only going to help you in your career get you where you want to be. And so I think being open to growing and change and learning all of these things is a real asset in someone's career.
So a learning professional has to be a professional at learning.
Yes.
It makes some
That's a good way of
sense.
putting it.
All right. Well, is there anything else you'd want to say before I let you go, Melanie?
I think that that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being part of the Learning Pro intros today. I really appreciate that you took the time to share everything you've learned with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
Of course. And for those of you who are watching, if you want to learn more about Melanie, there's some information in the description box below. So thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.